Ain't nothing free about free speech. And just like quantum physics, yes, two opposing things can be true at once. But, we live in a world of undereducated people. Now today, flash forward to 2025, we know that doesn't really work like that. And this, I think, is the root of this problem. Hey, episode, I think this is 4. Is this 5, guys? Which is it? It's 4, I should know that. This is episode 4 of the Gora Monologues, broadcasting to you live from Mumbai, Studio 4C, the Jeff Goldberg studio. I'm your host, Jeff. So today, we had our first request. That's right, the topic today came from someone within the team who wanted to talk about free speech. Oh boy, here it comes. Duck, watch out now. This one's going to be hot and messy. Now look, free speech... Let's be very clear about something here. There ain't nothing free about free speech. Now, I know this topic is a very, very ubiquitous one, and it's a hot button one because it's at the forefront of everything that's kind of going on anywhere in the world, from what you look at in social media, to the newspaper headlines, to what you're seeing on your nightly news, to the conversations you're having around the table with your family. And it doesn't matter what country or what culture you're in right now, everyone's kind of thinking about free speech, albeit in the form of the arts, albeit in the form of journalism, albeit in the form of, well, just sitting around talking to your dad about whether or not you agree on a particular topic. And I think the whole debate about free speech is flawed, because we're talking about free speech in this very black and white, stark way, as if there's a right side to this issue. And unfortunately, there isn't. And I think that in itself is actually where the debate about free speech begins. And the fact that I can even say that means that there is free speech. And I think one thing that we often forget, and to very much our detriment, and it's sad, is that there was a world not all that long ago where governments really did legislate against things that got said. As a matter of fact, not so long ago, it's happening right now in certain countries. And those of us in places where we can say what we want, think what we want, are very, very, very extremely privileged. However, free speech doesn't also think about something that's very important, which is the freedom to be offended. And yes, people have the right to be offended. People have the right to find things that people say offensive. And of course, that's real. So now here we arrive at the great divide between the two things, because can both these truths exist at the same time? The right to speak your mind and the right to be offended. And just like quantum physics, yes, two opposing things can be true at once. And in this case, these two things can be true and are true and should be true, because they make the debate about free speech and the freedom to be offended worth having. However, I think that we need to also add something to balance the scales a little bit here in this mad debate about free speech. And I'm throwing in my hat with the right to be offended. My mid-20th century philosophers like Sartre and Camus, the existentialists. Let's unpack that. A world where there are consequences to our actions. Essentially, existentialism, very simply, and I'm sure the graphics will come up now and say something fun and interesting about existentialism. Essentially, existentialism is the freedom to do whatever you want. Yes, I could stand up right now, go behind the camera and punch Brian in the nose, or kick Rahul, who's to the left of the camera, in the shin. But I'd have to deal with the consequences of that. That's a reality. Now, that is not something that's written into law or based on morality. It's something that is as obvious as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. If I was to smack around my camera people and my team, they would be unhappy with me. They might react. They might punch me in the nose, and, well, for good reason, yeah? So there are consequences to our actions, and I think we have to own that. Does that mean we temper our speech? No. But what it means is that we recognize that our words, as much as our actions, actually have weight and value. And to sit there and to try to discount that is a falsehood, and it's a flaw in the narrative of free speech at all costs. Because we know, and as we see constantly, this great debate happens to always arrive at this wall of hypocrisy. Because you might want to say something, you might want to push something, you might feel offended by something, and you might want to correct that something, but The minute you're the one in power, or the minute your team is in power, or the minute the color of the politics you're rooting for is ruling the roost, you don't allow people from the other side or the other sides to speak. And somehow that seems wrong. And, well, to be fair, it is. So in this existential balance I'm trying to create in your thought process about free speech, I want to add something else, which is this, is that the issue with free speech and the right to be offended is this, is that we live in a world of undereducated people. Uh-oh, I said it. I know you're all going to freak out now and you're going to want me to define what undereducated people are. I promise you, if you like this topic, we'll do a whole episode on it. But I've come up with this notion, and I could totally be wrong. Chances are I am. But let's just go with it. Once upon a time, in a world that never existed, because people, when they talk about the past, are often, it's mostly conjecture and pretty much our view of things. But let's just pretend once upon a time there was a world of uneducated people and educated people. So if you go back to the Constitutional Convention of the United States of America, let's use that as an example. As the founding individuals of the United States began to think about the Constitution coming out of the Federalist Paper model into a more universal federal centralized government model, they recognized that there were individuals in the society who were better educated and came from privileged backgrounds. And as part of their privilege, they owed it to the new republic to serve the country. And that was something that was set in the minds of these people as a means to an end to advance the new democratic process of the American Republic. Yes, and that's kind of how it worked, and of course, kind of how it worked for a while. Now, as we all know, nothing in theory ever really works well in practicality, but nonetheless, that was the theory, okay? So in that notion, you have the idea that there's an educated group of people. Now, today, we use a very, very nasty word for those people, elite, ooh la la, the elite, and we get very mad at the elite because they seem to know things we don't know. And the elite do really crummy things like, oh, well, we're on it, we understand things, don't you worry, they're non-elite people, you're going to sit in the back of the bus and you're going to have to wait till we figure this out. And of course, that's wrong. But let's just imagine that elite isn't this pejorative, but rather a group of people who are well-educated, who have devoted their lives to understanding topics that other people maybe did not have the time or the privilege to get to do, or maybe even the ability. And there's nothing wrong with that. On the other side of the divide, you have the uneducated, people who did not have the luxury or the benefit or the privileges of that education. And they, in this obviously idyllic model, would defer to the elite, ooh la la, to help them articulate and govern themselves. And this was, in theory, how it was going to work. And of course, there was always the Fourth Estate. What was the Fourth Estate? The Fourth Estate, and the only private business mentioned in the American Constitution, as is the case in a lot of constitutions, is the press. The press is the Fourth Estate in that it is an essential part of the democratic process, in that it informs the citizenry of what's going on such that they can make informed decisions about their leaders and about policy. All sounds wonderful and terrific. Now today, flash forward to 2025, we know that doesn't really work like this, so let's not be naive. But what has happened is that there is so much mistrust on all sides of the debate, on every issue, and it's not just politics, it's social media, it's art, it's music, it's painting, it's finance, it's everything is up for debate, from did COVID really happen in a Wuhan lab? I mean, do we even know, and does it really even matter? Now, of course, people are going to spend years thinking about whether or not it really matters, and of course the COVID experience matters. We'll do an episode on that one too. However, what I'm trying to say is that there's so much mistrust on all sides of every issue today that people walk into conversations already sure that the person whose opinion is antithetical or the opposite of theirs, that person is not opposite of them in opinion, that person is wrong. And we are so desperate to be right and correct in our thinking that we have to, and this is our ego at work, again, another episode for you coming your way, we have to be right because our self-worth and our self-image depends upon it. Does it really? Does it really? Well, that's for you to figure out in your own private time to think about and maybe even consider. But coming back to this point of the undereducated, people today have enough access to information that they know something. And that's great. And that's wonderful. And we should embrace that. We live in the information age. I know it doesn't seem like that, but we actually do. Any person on earth right now watching this episode can open up a new tab or go to another device and look up any topic he or she desires to learn about anything under the sun, from Wikipedia to much more advanced studies. They can go look at university websites. They can get into the Library of Congress. They can get into the libraries all over the world. They can go look at museums. That was never true before. We forget that. We've become so absolutely accustomed to the fact that you have literally the entire library of human knowledge at your fingertips that we forgot that in my lifetime, back in the 1990s and 80s when I was growing up, that wasn't true. You had to get a library card and go to your local library and hope they had the right book, and you hoped that it was in, and you only got it for a certain amount of time. They had to bring it back, otherwise you had to pay the fees. You guys who were born in the 70s like me know what I'm talking about. Those of you in the 80s might vaguely remember this. You in the 90s, maybe, depending on where in the world you were. But what I'm trying to say is that we live in this information age, and people are gobbling up this information in these echo chambers of the algorithms, which aren't really a free market at all. And as a matter of fact, there's a wonderful thinker, the former Greek finance minister and economist, Giannis Varoufakis, who you should check out. He's got a great Instagram page. He's got a great YouTube, and you should check him out. I'm a big fan. I love listening to him. Not because I agree with everything he says, because he's a contrarian, but he makes contrary points that are based on actual founded economic principles that I think are worthy of hearing. And he's just a voice in the room that's not everybody else's voice singing in the chorus of things are great. Because it doesn't take much to see out the window that things aren't great. And we need to stop this narrative that somehow our economies are growing and our lives are better because the stock markets of our country are going up and up and up. Because the stock market is a VIP club at the back of the party that only a few people even get an invitation to because they know it's there. Not everybody plays in the stock market, and we need to resurrect the idea that the real economy is people putting their hands on jobs and doing their jobs. I'm getting a bit tangential. That happens sometimes. I apologize. Back to the undereducated. The undereducated, which we all kind of are today, means that we have enough information and enough knowledge about topics that are meaningful to us that we think we know what we're talking about. And that arms us with the ability to say what we feel. And even if we offend somebody, no matter how offensive we are, no matter how incorrect we may be, we have a right to say it because we know it to be true, and it has to be said. And this, I think, is the root of this problem. That debate is being sparked by folks who don't fully know the most important part of their argument and or their topic, which is the other side. The other side of the argument. A truly educated person, much like a samurai, knows his or her weakness as much as they know their strength. And a wonderful example of that would be the American author, former professor, or possibly still a professor, I'd have to look that up, at UCLA, it might have been USC, but I know he was in LA, Francis Fukuyama. Francis Fukuyama wrote a book called The End of History and the Last Man, which was basically premised on the idea that now that Soviet communism has fallen in the 1990s, we have arrived at the end of history, and man's search for the right economic and governmental model in that liberal democracy and capitalism are the right fit for humankind. And that was the whole thesis of his book. He was wrong. And guess what? He even admitted he was wrong. He wrote an op-ed article about it. But what I loved about his book when I read it in the late 1990s was this, that he was willing to bring into his book the arguments that were as much against his thinking as they were his thinking. And that's a sign of a true samurai, the sign of a true ninja, because it is willing to hold up what is ostensibly contrary to its view, but nonetheless let it exist in the realm of thought and discussion for the reader to decide what he or she wants to believe. And that, I think, is a beautiful, absolutely important part of that book. And here we've mentioned Giannis Varoufakis, we've mentioned Francis Fukuyama, who, by the way, politically speaking, could not be further apart than you could ever imagine, by the way. But What I'm trying to say is that just because someone in your family, maybe you're sitting around at dinner right now, maybe you're about to go sit down at dinner, or maybe at lunch, or a colleague, or this and that, maybe someone disagrees with you, but hear them out. Understand what they're saying, and don't be offended by their opinion. But nonetheless, if you are offended by their opinion, then have the wherewithal to tell them that in a way where the conversation moves forward. Because I assure you, this is a bit of a guess, but most people don't want to offend people. Surely they want to get their opinion out there. Surely they want their voice to be heard. And most people who are passionate about a topic, like myself, do want to exact change by getting their opinion out there. However, they don't want to hurt the sensibilities of others, because how can you change someone's viewpoint if you're offending them? So have a degree of existential caution when you begin to speak to your audience or the individuals you speak to. Recognize that you might not know everything about the topic, and embrace the fact that the other side of the topic is actually as meaningful to your side of the topic, because eventually somewhere in the middle is what democracy is all about. Compromise. That's right, compromise. The 1,000 paper cuts that kill everybody in the process of moving the debate forward. We have to be willing to compromise. And in between ultimate free speech and ultimate the right to be offended lies this huge grayscale where we actually all live. And if you are willing to say something that is at the far end of that scale, in the world of black or in the world of white, you must know that you might offend someone. But if you take out the time to listen as much as you do to speak, you might also find that you will share something. And you might even learn something. And that, I think, is really a superpower. The ability to learn in the face of absolute disagreement. And much like the martial arts, it's all about defense. It's all about making sure that you use this in a wise way where you are defending yourself, but not defending yourself in a way where you're trying to harm the other side, simply that you're trying to ensure you don't suffer harm. As always, my friends, these episodes arrive at this place that I think is very important. And even though we're calling this the Gora Monologues, and I guess here we're in episode 4, the name's probably going to stick around, I think it's starting to emerge to me in the course of these conversations I'm having with you, is it's about kindness and humanity. It's about a shared sense of who we are. Certainly our diverse cultures, our languages, our belief systems, our moralities, our governmental systems, all of them can be debated ad nauseum and should be. But none of those things and none of those debates diminish our humanity, our shared sense of living together on this planet. And I really hope that this chat today sparks the thought in your mind of simply, hey, yeah, maybe I was a little offended, but why was I offended? What about what got said offended me? And how can I take that hurt and manifest it into a broader conversation about the topic where the person who offended me or the idea that offends me can possibly become something where I can find at least some degree of compromise and middle ground. Of course, history is made up of uncompromising characters and uncompromising moments, but most of those uncompromising characters and moments suffer violence and hurt. And if we can avoid that, I think that's a wise thing to do, because there's been enough of that. There's just enough of it. And we don't want to see any more property damaged or people damaged by really unfortunate circumstances. So, I guess that's all I got on free speech today. Thanks for the request, Brian. I appreciate it. I hope I added something meaningful to your thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. This was episode 4 of the Gora Monologues, broadcasting live from Mumbai, Studio 4C, from the Jeff Goldberg studio. Once again, I'm your host, Jeff, and I will see you in episode 5. Keep the comments and the questions coming. Make sure to hit like, subscribe, keep checking us out because, ladies and gentlemen, this is actually a really, really fun thing to do, but what makes it the most fun is knowing that it's reaching people just like you.